Hey guys, time for another Bearded Wonder Explains video. This time we're going to be talking about industrial reforms. So after the Industrial Revolution, during what we call the Progressive Era, there was a huge push for the government to get involved in the way that businesses did what they did in order to make certain things more fair or safe or whatever the case is. And so we're going to talk about that. So before we do, we need to understand how a company works. And so we're going to talk about company overhead a little bit. We're going to talk about just how companies make money, and we're going to use a factory as an example. So factories have an owner, and basically the owner collects a profit, which is basically whatever they get from selling the product minus the overhead. And the overhead is just the cost that it takes to run their business. And so we kind of need to break down that overhead a little bit to understand what goes into the cost of running a business. So the first thing is the actual building is going to cost some money, and so you got to build the building. You also have to buy supplies for your building. In other words, whatever you're going to put into the factory in order to make a product to sell goes into your overhead costs, and that's definitely going to be a part of it. The next thing is you have to pay your workers, so the people that work there are going to cost you money. You have to pay for marketing and advertising. You have to pay for delivery or distribution. You have to get the products to wherever they're going to be sold, and sometimes that just means that the distributors come to you. Other times it means that you load them up on a truck or a train or a plane or something, and you get them to wherever they're going to be. And so after you add up all of these things, whatever is left over is profit. And before or during the Industrial Revolution, but before the Progressive Era, the profits were pretty big. The owner was able to make a whole bunch of money, largely because they picked how much they spent for all of these things. But during the Progressive Era, we have a movement where the government's going to begin to get involved in a lot of this. So, for example, tariffs. You can see that our owner here has kind of lost two of his little dollar signs, and that's because he had to use some of his profits to pay for a tariff. Has nothing to do with specifically the cost of running the business itself. However, because the government charges a tax on those products that are coming from overseas, they're spending more money on those products. Another one would be like quality control. For example, not necessarily during the Progressive Era specifically, but now lead. You can't put lead in paint anymore because it's toxic. If kids eat paint chips, they'll get like 5 heads. Not really, but they could get sick. Definitely would not be good for them, and so we have to pay to inspect those things. So there goes more of our company's profit. Minimum wage laws came around in the Progressive Era. They started to say, listen, you have to pay workers certain amounts of money. And so, again, we're eating into the company owner's profits. Pollution control. You can't just dump all of the nasty, wicked byproducts that you're creating into the oceans or into the rivers. You get a weird Chinese situation where your rivers turn yellow and people literally can't drink what's coming from that river anymore. Not a good situation. So you got to pay, but that means you have to upgrade your building. And in order to be in compliance, that means you got to spend more money. It adds to the overhead cost. We also have to comply with like OSHA, which is basically occupational safety and hazard regulations. So the government says, listen, kids are getting their hands sucked into the machines and ripped off, and so we have to do that, or you can't use kids at all. And so that's going to add to the expense of the business. We also have organizations like the FCC that kind of regulate different communications, radio communications, TV communications, all that kind of stuff. Makes that stuff more expensive. And so we have a situation where those profits that were very large kind of get diminished greatly for the business owner. So what's he going to do? Well, he's not going to keep a low profit. He is going to manipulate the product price. So let's say that he wants to look at those tariffs, and the government raises the tariffs. He says, fine, I'll just make my product more expensive, get some of that money back. If you want to add more regulation, let's say pollution controls on the smoke that's coming out, fine. That's going to be more expensive for me, so I'm just going to go ahead and make my stuff more expensive too. And so the products go up. And so, this is what a lot of people have a hard time understanding, is that the price is largely up to the owner. Now, he has to be competitive with the market and other things like that, but as long as he is, he can kind of raise prices. And oftentimes, if, say, the government raises a tariff, or raises the minimum wage rate or something else like that, basically, since that's going to apply to every business that this guy's in competition with, they're just all going to raise their prices, and their prices are still going to be expensive. But ultimately, the people, the consumers, are the ones that are ending up paying for it. Now, most of these examples are from the progressive era of changes that people made, whether we think they're good or bad. But there are some things even in our modern economy, if we wanted to continue to add to this, we definitely could. For example, pollution control on the vehicles. A lot of people have talked about like carbon taxes to deal with global warming and other things like that. Well, that's going to make those distribution costs more expensive. People have talked about minimum wage increases, maybe having a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour. Right now, the minimum wage in South Carolina is like $7.25. And so you're talking about doubling the cost of those employees. Well, what's that going to do? Ultimately, it's probably going to make the products more expensive. We're just going to pay for it at the grocery store, or we're going to pay for it at Walmart. These owners, these companies aren't going to get to the point where they have zero profits just for the good of humanity. And so the more that we do those things, the more expensive our products become. Tariffs is another one. Right now, we don't have tariffs on some countries, like Canada and through NAFTA, at least in the past, not on Mexico. And so if we put those tariffs back in place, ultimately, what's that going to do? Well, it's going to make your product more expensive. So that's just kind of how businesses work. And specifically, as we're looking at the progressive era, minimum wage, child labor laws, environmental and pollution controls, quality control, product control, all of that kind of stuff is definitely regulations from the government. That's laws for businesses, what they have to do, that came about in the progressive era, the early 1900s, specifically when we realized that businesses that were just, all they cared about was making money, right? And they didn't take care of the environment or do those kinds of things. And so this is when the government kind of steps in and says, no, you have to do that. But ultimately, in some ways, it just ends up making the product more expensive for the people that buy it. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you have a great day.